Hello, no King's Day. No King's Day is used to screen a breaching method and pretend other, and is being used to sense for the breaching method. Self-valued roles with the breaching method having our founders' communications that they had declassified for themselves and for us replaced. And the only founder we know of those plural is James Madison. That's the only one we know the name of. Even as a president, he didn't have free speech because it was a breaching method entrenched. It had nothing to do with kings. Kings were in, except for how everything the breaching method does, it does and did through other names. Before America's founders were born, before religious messages were born, it forced, tricked, hurt, and persuaded the locations, areas, and states of some ancient countries, so to speak, that which we refer to as ancient, to blame other things, others ourselves, for what it did, and then to defend that, and then to have counters of that proper, but blaming the other people wrong exactly the way it needed. Simultaneously, more and more people taking themselves self-value, incapable more and more of affording discern which syntax is proper with convictions, like no kings. In other words, that our founders' plan was to force. There were internationally monitored conversations, northern colonies and southern colonies, more than 13, and roles of them with slavery, northern colonies and southern colonies. And that was forced by the breaching method left entrenched, and all rolls with it, and with all kinds of other crazy things against themselves and others. And if they protested about any of those things outside of internationally monitored conversations, they hurt and killed themselves and everyone around them. And that's because those internationally monitored conversations weren't just operated by kings and queens. They're operated by a hyper archetypal criminal enterprise, if you will. I am not a lawyer. So be aware, because there are founders' words replaced. And they have, in other words, our founders, plural. We know that there were Native Americans behind that and the colonists behind James Madison. And they counter-extorted George Washington. And they forced the Civil War. But see, you guys have that replaced. Not one has traced. Because campuses A through Z, they are distinct, but they're sickly non-distinctly too, still. Collusion /S with that which sickly non-distinctly too. Had slavery entrenched northern colonies, southern colonies, and they were possessions of other nations and companies involved with that. Criminally foreign influence possessions, criminally foreign influence / hyper-criminally foreign influence. 3 ways. Nature itself is showing us what criminal insidious nature is. When the syntax of names A through Z speak for positives or negatives, and exceptions or difference. In other words, so our founders were simultaneously against kings and for them, because every individual is prevented free speech, no matter how powerful they could get. And any grouping of countries, that even if any majority of people, any grouping, that's why they couldn't counter it. That's why still we can't. We can't even afford people to be honest. They're changing and stealing our identities, just putting mass fake things in transcripts. Black people's right through administrations were wars with the World Trade Center attack. Were roles with the World Trade Center attack. There are legitimate threats and fears unfolding where they have sciences together, but there are collusion /S. Right through, in other words, the differences rackets. They have collusions right through with all sides through wars, like with psychiatry. All kinds of fake transcripts in those databases with the interbranch tied to them and the intelligence tied to them. East Hartford locations have roles with the former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin. Intercities with the state judicial branch offices, corrections offices, New Britain Superior Court, a bunch of people and tied to New Britain Superior Court. have roles with East Hartford locations, and people next to where they build planes know. Involved with the World Trade Center attack, also with the Air Force and other pilots. I don't even know all their names. Increasingly, the roles each year with predicate acts and facts leading up to the World Trade Center attack in that context and since. They already were shown they were quoting our, they're using truths for lies and dishonestly. As people who used it, our founders forced them to pretend they were things like kings. No one had the means to everyone was forced to protest and put all their motivations then were real. Even our founders, even James Madison, didn't have free speech. We had this declassified for us. How and why? There was a breaching method entrenched. You guys have our founders' communications with that replaced right from it. And the value of Marbury versus Madison is that real justice must satisfy real justice, all appearances of real justice. Real justice must satisfy all appearances of real justice, black pupils. Not one have seen the whites of eyes. Because not one will do anything but change and fake what people say at locations and online. As collusion /S with all natures of crime scenes with the interbranch still putting fake things there. The difference of their guilt at crime scenes never stopped being used by the breaching method. The differences of their guilt. So even when its words are bad, the whole place is involved with all kinds of natures of organized crimes. All natures of identities of the sciences, including the law.